Anti-social acolytes.
This matrix characterizes socio-political systems across four axes. Firstly, collectivism versus individualism. Secondly, anti-property versus pro-property. Thirdly, anti-market versus pro-market. And fourthly, anarchist or anti-state versus totalitarian or pro-state.
So, if for any of y'all who don't know this sort of leftist jargon being put around, so we've got collectivist versus individualist. So we have in America a very individualist mindset about a lot of things where it's like, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, worry about yourself, build up, you start a business, go out there, it's your fault if you're in poverty. And collectivist is more of a collective sort of sense of the world and sort of outlook on life and systematically way of viewing things. So that's kind of the scale going that way. And then anti-market versus pro-market, pretty self-explanatory, I guess, just the varying degrees of how much these ideologies like or appreciate a market. If there's no market, a little bit of aspects of a market, full-on free market, no regulations at all, that sort of thing. And then we've got sort of anarchism versus totalitarianism, which is a big divide between leftist circles a lot. That's kind of like the divide between Leninist and anarchist. So that's kind of like the idea of anarchist is kind of like a response sort of to, not a response, but it's supposed to be anti sort of authoritarian leftism, sort of like Stalinism or leftism. And then pro-state is sort of that Leninist sort of thought. And then finally, we got anti-property versus pro-property. Are we cool with private property or are we not cool with it? To what degree? And that's not personal property, though. There is a difference between personal property and private property. So keep that in mind.
Yeah,
and go on there.
I know maybe
got,
a couple people are wondering, so this is actually going to be a more congested version of what you would normally see as kind of an explanation of the different ideas or different like schools of thought going on within leftism. Most people are used to the political compass, but unfortunately, when it comes to describing things more accurately, the political compass really falls short.
That the matrix displayed here is not shown exactly to scale, and descriptions of each anarchist system are approximations rather than fine-grained and precise. Although I designed this matrix myself, later I found a very similar figure on page 38 of Ruth Kinner's book, Anarchism, A Beginner's Guide. This was reassuring since it provides validation for my own matrix. Now let's look at these anarchist systems. Firstly, we'll consider the strongly to weakly collectivist systems: Anarcho-Primitivism, Anaco Communism, Anarcho-Collectivism, and Anarcho-Syndicalism. Anarcho-Primitivism is strongly anarchist, strongly collectivist, strongly anti-market, and strongly anti-property. Its most distinctive feature is a deliberate regression to pre-industrial society, or even a pre-agricultural society, which typically includes opposition to the domestication of animals and plants, and opposition to the hunting of animals. Although anarcho-primitivism typically correlates with ecofeminism and anti-patriarchal views, it remains in tension with feminism, since it would require women to accept pre-industrial rates of death in childbirth and a much shorter life expectancy, and would expose children to pre-industrial rates of infant mortality. It also has a strong tendency towards ableism, since an anarcho-primitivist society not only favours mentally and physically abled people, but also disadvantages people who are neurodivergent or mentally or physically disabled or less abled by depriving them of medication and technology which helps improve their quality of life. Anarcho-primitivism arguably also suffers from a romanticized view of pre-modern and pre-agricultural life, which perpetuates the dangerous myth of the noble savage and imagines that the vast majority of social evils will naturally be eliminated simply by returning to the lifestyle of the pre-Neolithic age of around 15,000 years ago, commonly known as the Stone Age, a view which is optimistic at best and complete fantasy at worst.
So this is kind of a little bit of a meme one, in my opinion. It is return to monkey in ideology form, quite literally. So it's very strongly collectivist. As the one thing I do like about anarcho-primitivism is it is very collectivist because that kind of shows that a lot of people like to say it's human nature to be greedy. That's why we can never have communism or socialism. Well, as if we do return to monkey, it is our societies back in the Neolithic era, as they said, were very heavily collectivist and a very literally primitivist communist societies. So, and the human nature argument is very silly a lot of the times, but this ideology is kind of a little bit of a meme. Return to monkey. I don't know. Are you feeling this one? You like what you hear?
So the point he brings up about ableism is I kind of feel like that's kind of a really good argument that he made. But also, you could use that against vegans, ironically enough. People who are like, I'm not going to take a vaccine if a fucking animal is harmed in the production of it or something like that. There's a big cross section there with like science deniers and vegans and stuff like that. Did he say
They want to go back to pre-industrial revolution, I believe, is the typical anarcho-primitivist thought. Pre-industrial revolution, so before we had a boom in technology. First boom.
So they rejected technology just like altogether.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, they better stop fucking tweeting about it then.
Yeah. That's probably why we never fucking hear about them too much. Maybe they're true to form. Yeah, literally.
Left-wing Amish people.
Yeah.
Honestly,
all right, let's go on
I
here.
give that one,
sorry.
as a meme status, I give that one an A+, but from a pragmatic point of view, that's like, no.
Yeah, one of the worst.
Fuck that
Yeah.
one.
Okay. Yeah, so these next three are kind of similar. They're pretty similar in like descripting, but I feel like I can kind of give a good separation of them all, and he'll also kind of describe the difference. But these three next are very close together, I'd say.
Similar, differing in implementation and aims. Anaco Communism is strongly anarchist, strongly collectivist, strongly anti-market, and strongly anti-property. Its most distinctive features include common ownership of the means of production, collectively owned property, and the abolition of wage labour and private property. It is differentiated from communism primarily by its rejection of both social hierarchies and the state. It is strongly anarchist, strongly collectivist, strongly anti-market, and strongly anti-property. Its most distinctive features include collective ownership of the means of production, a communal market, the preservation of wage labour, and the abolition of private property. It is differentiated from anarcho-communism primarily by its use of wage labour and a collective market rather than collectively owned property. Anarcho-Syndicalism is strongly anarchist, moderately collectivist, strongly anti-market, and strongly anti-property. Its most distinctive features include a socio-economic system of labour syndicates, strong egalitarianism, rejection of any unjustifiable hierarchy, and the abolition of wage labour and private property. It is differentiated from anarcho-collectivism primarily by its rejection of wage labour.
So the way I view these, they're kind of all very similar, as we saw. Anarcho-syndicalism is almost like, to me, like a way of implementing anarcho-communism, not necessarily a separate ideology on its own necessarily. But my problem with anarcho-communism in like a term in the way it is it is communism, but rejection of the state and totalitarianism, which is great and all, but what Marx considered to be communism and what is understood to be is communism is a stateless, classless, borderless society. So we've already got the stateless function in there. So that's why I feel it's kind of odd to call yourself necessarily an anarcho-communist, because it's almost literally just saying, I'm a communist, but I don't like authoritarianism, which I think there are, I don't know, being a communist on its own should be that in the end. Because communism is more like a end final step in a utopia sort of society in a sense. So, I mean, I get where like the history behind it and what it means and all that, but I mean, to me, it's just kind of like you're just a communist that does not like Stalin. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, anarcho-communism, yeah, I mean, pretty much that, yeah, you're right there. I think you hit that right on the head. I'd still give anarcho-communism a based out of based, so.
Definitely. No, it's just a little weird on the semantics for me, mainly. I mean, it's still I would consider myself an anarcho-communist, probably. And I mean, I could be more specific, of course, as we'll see. But that's kind of where so anarcho-syndicalism comes into play, as it's sort of a method of implementing anarcho-communism as it's a way of seizing the means of productions via like mass unionization and workers themselves seizing the means from the capitalists themselves. Now, the reason I like anarcho-syndicalism is it's kind of like, for me, a decent response to the question of revolution versus reform in the present day in America, because that's another big divide on the left. And so in my mind, revolution in today's world in America, like 0% chance of happening almost. Like, I don't see a direct revolution of the state happening in America, especially. And reform, I think, is good to alleviate the pains and sufferings of people suffering under capitalism, but it is very hard, as we've seen, to be a communist or an anarchist or a socialist and be elected in America. We couldn't even fucking get Bernie Sanders. Everybody freaked out at him, and he's just a social democrat. Very light shit. And so the reason I find anarcho-syndicalism to be a good answer for that is I feel like it is the most possible way right now as it stands that we could actually start to transform our society into one of a socialist society by spreading a bigger sense of unionization and continuing to just spread communist ideals and like socialist thought and kind of unite everyone and just have massive worker strikes and seize the means of productions via that way and then deal with the state from there.
Consider the four weakly to strongly individualist systems: Anarcho-Mutualism, Christian Anarchism, Anarcho-Individualism, and Anarcho-Capitalism.
Yikes.
Anarcho-Mutualism is strongly anarchist, weakly to moderately individualist, weakly pro-market, though the market is strongly regulated rather than free, and weakly pro-property. Its most distinctive features include the preservation of private property, a strong emphasis on voluntarism and liberty of conscience, the preservation of wage labour, and the abolition of private property. Its founder, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, characterized it as, quote, the synthesis of communism and property. Christian anarchism is strongly
mutualism, for those of you who don't know, is actually, to my understanding, the first form of anarchism that was kind of born, actually. So that's why it's kind of more on the pro-market side, is because back in that time period, it was a lot more like anarchist and like more of a anti-hierarchical to have these markets, but in a more like labor voucher sort of system with those markets. It's a very hard ideology to really pinpoint, but it is kind of like the birth of anarchists. As the founder said, it's sort of a synthesis of communism and property. And it was kind of the first like early formations of anarchism that we saw. I mean, of course, before Anarcho-Primitivism, but that's just humans doing human things. But yeah, so for that reason, it's definitely, I think, in our modern time, it's a very time-centric ideology and not very effective in our modern time. But being the birth of anarchism, I think it's pretty cool, pretty based, I'd say.
I'll give it an interesting out of based.
Yeah, interesting out of based is fair.
Weakly to moderately individualist, weakly pro-market, though the market is strongly regulated rather than free, and weakly pro-property. Christian anarchism is arguably one of the earliest forms of systematic anarchism, since it is documented in Christian communities of the first 3 centuries of the Christian era. It is very similar to Anarcho-Mutualism, emphasizing strongly the mutual responsibility of society's members to each other and communal action. In many ways, it can be seen as Anarcho-Mutualism organized according to a Christian ethos. Christian anarchism is focused far more on social organization than political and economic organization, so specific economic views and values may differ between Christian anarchists. Consequently, although communal organization, shared labor, and economic cooperation are encouraged, including various forms of worker-owned organizations, such as co-ops, there is no specific stance on private property. Nevertheless, exploitative labor and economic practices are condemned strongly. Christian anarchism is strongly egalitarian and socially revolutionary, rejecting any ethically unjustifiable hierarchies and recognizing God as the only supreme authority. Christian anarchism emphasizes voluntarism and freedom of conscience, rejecting any forms of social organization by force, and typically agrees with a strong separation between church and state. Christian anarchism also opposes military conscription and participation in the military, but promotes civil disobedience, passive resistance, and revolution by personal example rather than coercion. Leo Tolstoy was an early Christian anarchist, and his book The Kingdom of God is Within You, published in 1894, was an influential work on the movement. Anarcho-Individualism.
Okay.
So, it's pretty much mutualism, but not based.
Yeah, because it said Christian in it.
Yeah, it supports separation of church and state, which is kind of based, I guess. That's cool.
Yeah, how does that work out though when it's called Christians? Like what?
Yeah.
Is moderately anarchist, moderately to strongly individualist, moderately to strongly pro-market, and moderately to strongly pro-property. Although distinctive from other anarchist systems, it shares values with anarcho-mutualism and anarcho-capitalism. Although capitalism as such is typically rejected, competitive markets are not. Its most distinctive features include opposition to democracy, acceptance of a minimal state, preservation of private property, and general opposition to both collectivism and Christianity.
So
Bad.
yeah, bad. It's basically anarcho-capitalism light. It's like edging on there, I guess. Yeah, very stinky.
Yeah, honestly, terrible. I know the next one's going to be awful, so I just want everybody to know
It's
that.
kind of like, I mean, it's kind of like what libertarianism is to anarcho-capitalism almost. It kind of feels like American libertarianism almost, but like, I don't know, not exactly. I don't know. Weird to describe, but some would say American libertarianism is just anarcho-capitalism, but we'll hear about that in this next one.
And
Don't tread it on me, boys.
I don't want to do this one. Let's just skip it.
No.
Anarcho-capitalism is weakly anarchist, strongly individualist, strongly pro-market, and strongly pro-property. Its position in anarchism is much disputed, with many anarchists viewing it as a contradiction in terms due to its encouragement of capitalism, private property, the free market, wage labour, and comprehensive privatisation, as opposed to the communalism or collectivism which typically characterises anarchism. Anarcho-capitalism is often conflated with libertarianism, with which it shares most of its features. Having summarised briefly the key features of these common
So
forms...
that's anarcho-capitalism. Dog shit. Not even anarchism, really. The worst one. Not based in the slightest. Terrible is the synopsis there.
Yeah, just awful. Purely awful. I'm going to give that one a 0 out of based. 0 out of
I
based.
have a notable anarcho-capitalist that ran in America. I forgot his name, but he was a guy who openly was for
Donald Trump.
no, yeah, he was openly for child rape, like legalizing women as property.
Yeah,
all
I
that,
remember him.
Whatever his fucking name was,
It was in like
forget.
Kentucky or something. I forgot.
And he got arrested for like, yeah. So that's kind of the what you can expect from anarcho-capitalist.
There's going to be a picture of
the
him
kind of people they
in
expect.
the edit right here.
Nathan Larson, that's what it was. Nathan Larson.
What a cool guy.
That dude. Yeah, so yeah. He's a white supremacist, very cool. Yeah, he's advocated for curtailing women's rights and decriminalizing child sexual abuse and incest, a self-described quasi-neo-reactionary libertarian. So yeah, literal pedophiles. This is the pedophile ideology.
of anarchism, they will now be contrasted with non-anarchist systems which share some of the same features. These will be described in brief, since the aim here is simply to provide a useful counterpoint to identify how anarchism differs from them. Firstly, let's consider the four strongly to weakly collectivist systems: Marxism, democratic socialism, Stalinism and Marxist-Leninism, and Maoism. Marxist-Leninism and Stalinism are strongly collectivist, strongly anti-market, strongly totalitarian and pro-state, and strongly anti-property. Unlike anarchism, these systems not only permit, but actually encourage the enforcement of the system on society without reference to the liberty of the individual and against their will if necessary. Although both systems ostensibly aim to build a classless and egalitarian communist system, they are diametrically opposed to anarchism insofar as they intend to first establish a socialist state with a socio-political hierarchy. Also contrary to anarchist principles, both Marxist-Leninism and Stalinism view political and physical violence as legitimate tools of social change and labour organisations instead, subjugating workers to the state.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that's, kind of the ideas of a more authoritarian state. I often hear that a lot of difference between anarchists and socialists, like Marxist-Leninists, is that Marxist-Leninists believe in that middle section, which is socialism in between capitalism and communism, and anarchists want to go straight to communism. And I don't know how accurate of a descriptor that is, but that like kind of leaves me conflicted on if I would self-describe myself on as an anarchist, because I do feel that middle stage is very important and needs to happen. But yeah, this is just kind of the traditional USSR ideology, the sort of vanguard party coming in and doing a revolution and for the peasants and the workers and the proletariat, sort of Leninist theory and whatnot. So
I'll give that one a based, just out of respect.
yeah, based out of respect, probably the best attempt at socialism we have seen. And, for all of its faults, it did also bring some good to both socialist thought and just the people of Russia. Even
Failed
I
state.
do have, yeah, even though I very much do have problems with that sort of ideology, though, but still.
Known as Mao Zedong thought, Mao Zedong 思想 in Chinese, is strongly collectivist, strongly anti-market,
His whole name, he's in
strongly
trouble.
totalitarian and pro-state, and strongly anti-property. As a development of Marxist-Leninism, it shares much of the same principles and therefore differs from anarchism in the same ways. It is differentiated from them mainly by its emphasis on the peasant class as the primary agents of revolution instead of the proletariat. Like Stalin,
Okay, so he said proletariat, so I have to take this shot now.
Take a shot. Yeah, take the
I
shot.
did
There
tell
it is.
everybody I would do that. So cheers to making minimum wage.
Cheers to the proletariat. I can't speak.
Stalinism and Marxist-Leninism, Maoism considers violence to be a legitimate tool for bringing about the revolution and controlling members of society, encapsulated in Mao's famous quotation, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun." 枪杆子里面出政王 in Chinese. Mao
Okay, he did not need to do that.
I love the way he just busts out Chinese like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, like, respect for actually saying it, but like he did not. That wasn't necessary, dude.
He's just flexing.
further stated, quote, "According to the Marxist theory of the state, the army is the chief component of state power."
Just pretty much Leninism, but emphasis on the
militaristic.
peasant.
Yeah.
Yeah, more militaristic, more on the peasants taking the revolution. Kind of the same thing, pretty much, just a little different in implementation. It's kind of like a good way to look at it. Leninism versus Maoism is it's kind of like Marxism for China at the time is sort of Maoism. It's very time centered and sort of focused on the way the Chinese economy was and their method of transforming China into a communist state. And the same with Leninism is like the vanguard party and doing the revolution for the peasant and proletariat class is like very centered and good for Russia's time period and whatnot, and maybe the best way for that. So these are very like historic time period, I guess, ideologies you could say.
Yeah, a lot of them are more like Maoism wouldn't be very different from Marxist-Leninism if the revolution had already happened. You know, like if they were like restructuring their society, Maoism wouldn't really fucking mean anything different than Marxist-Leninism. It's just more relating to the ethos behind it, like or I guess more the mythology behind how to enact it. But yeah, that's exactly honestly, what they did in Vietnam.
Yeah, I don't really hear a lot of people say they're a Maoist, really. I mean, they just say Leninist at that point. Marxist-Leninist.
Yeah, because it's about overtaking the
state.
Yeah, the bourgeoisie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm speaking Russian now. Actually, that's not Russian.
Ooh.
That's German, but
yeah,
whatever. Or whatever language it
right.
is. I'm sorry. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Boop.
Marxism is strongly collectivist, strongly anti-market, moderately totalitarian and pro-state, and strongly anti-property. Marxism aims to overthrow capitalism through a violent socialist revolution of what Marx called, quote, revolutionary terror, end quote, and establish first a dictatorship of the proletariat, the working class, and ultimately a classless communist society. The fact that Marxism firstly establishes a totalitarian state and considers violence to be a legitimate tool for bringing about the revolution and controlling members of society distinguishes it sharply from anarchism.
Yeah, Marxism, he's just kind of describing just general Marxist thought there, like what Marx actually wrote and his sort of thought in the Communist Manifesto and whatnot.
Based.
Very based, yeah.
And also, we forgot Maoism. Is Maoism, yeah, that's what it is. Maoism based?
Oh, kind of based. A little less based than I guess.
I'd say in practice, it was a little less based, so I'll give it a based?
Hesitant based.
Yeah, hesitant based. But you need to give yours. So
Based.
there.
That's mine too.
That's what
Yeah.
I wanted to hear.
Democratic socialism is moderately collectivist, moderately to strongly anti-market, moderately totalitarian and pro-state, and moderately anti-property. Distinctive features of democratic socialism include a socialist economy organized by a democratic state which owns most, if not all, of the means of production, the abolition of capitalism and wage labor, and limits on, but not abolition of, private property. Democratic socialism is differentiated from anarchism primarily by its organization of a state and its institution of hierarchies, though democratic socialists often have a stateless society in view as a future goal. Now let's consider the four weakly to strongly individualist systems.
So democratic socialism, I want to make a distinction, is not what Bernie Sanders is. He says he's a democratic socialist. AOC says he's a democratic socialist. They are not. They are social democrats. They are two different things, but effectively in America, you could say democratic socialist is social democracy. I don't know. The term has kind of got conflated in America.
Yeah, it's just because they didn't want to have socialist be the first word that people see.
Basically, the way I like to... oh, sorry. Go on.
Ironically enough, it's really fucked up that they mixed them up, though, in America, because in Spain, I believe, the whole revolution there, the fucking socialist Democrats killed... or the Democratic Socialists and the Socialist Democrats actually killed each other, and they betrayed each other. So it's like, that's a really big fuck up there. That's like...
Distinctive features of social democracy include a capitalist economy run by a democratic state with a well-regulated market and an emphasis on social welfare systems provided by the government. Social democracy is differentiated from anarchism primarily by its organization of a state, its institution of hierarchies, and its capitalist economy. Democratic liberalism is...
This is what Bernie Sanders and AOC is. So it is pretty much the Norwegian style of, and a lot of Europe style of economics currently. It is basically capitalism with a ton of safety nets, very well regulated markets and whatnot. But it still is a very imperialist ideology and imperialist economic system. It still requires the exploitation of third world countries that the countries that are social democracies participate in, and they're all just basically hyper saving capitalism is what it is a lot of the time. It's preserving capitalism in the most socialist way you can. Yeah.
But in the interim, I'll give it a okay out of base. Just
I mean,
than what we live in.
I like it because it should be where America should be at that point now, but we're not somehow. And we definitely need to get to that point if we're going to move to any other more left direction. So I think that is definitely the first step in America as it stands if we're not going to go the route of revolution, is social democracy.
And it all starts with voting for Joe Biden on November 3rd or whatever.
I don't know about that, maybe. He's more of a...
The
next ideology too? We'll see. No, we'll see him in a little bit, I think.
The three swords?
Yeah.
Those are cool. I want one of those.
Yeah, I want to be that.
All these are letters and shit. I want to be the fucking sword. Or the snake is cool too.
Oh, God.
Moderately to strongly individualist, moderately to strongly pro-market, weakly totalitarian but pro-state, and moderately to strongly pro-property. Distinctive features of democratic liberalism include a capitalist economy run by a democratic state with a weakly regulated market, little or no emphasis on social welfare systems provided by the government, and the government prioritizing corporations over members of society. Democratic liberalism is differentiated from anarchism primarily by its organization of a state, its institution of hierarchies, its capitalist economy, its pro-market and pro-individualist stance, and its comparative lack of concern for government-provided social welfare.
So that one is Hillary Clinton. So, yeah.
Yeah, that one is America. That's just America, but maybe... Yeah, literally. Yeah, it's liberalism. And all... effectively, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are both very liberal, especially when it comes to their foreign policies and the way they handle foreign affairs and fucking bomb the shit out of or exploit third world nations. It's just prioritizing corporations over the population and just not pure capitalism, but a very weakly regulated capitalist system, which is what we have in America.
So I'm going to give that just an absolute fuck this shit out of base.
So fucking bad. Yeah.
So fucking bad. The word it's if it was on a numerical scale, the last two, or especially the last one, would be the worst. So this is like a 2 out of 10, basically, just because it's
weak.
A functioning society.
It's so weak.
Yeah,
it doesn't go far enough. It perpetuates suffering in a capitalist society.
Yeah, so it's like putting a fucking one of those little tiny dot band-aids on a fucking cannonball wound. So
exactly. Yeah.
And then kissing it though. So
yeah, that's good.
Libertarianism is strongly individualist, strongly pro-market, weakly totalitarian and weakly pro-state, and strongly pro-property. Distinctive features of libertarianism include a capitalist economy with a totally unregulated market, decentralized government with minimal intervention in the economy and society, and a virtually complete disregard for government-provided social welfare. Libertarianism is differentiated from anarchism primarily by its institution of hierarchies, its capitalist economy, its pro-market and pro-individualist stance, and its lack of concern for government-provided social welfare.
Bad. Next.
Very bad. Yeah. So a lot of I'd say this one, a lot of conservatives in America think they are libertarian, but really what they are just conservatives that want to smoke weed and whatnot. When in reality, a lot of like a libertarian, what actually is for open, like it has some aspects of it that are good, very few, of course, but there is the true libertarian is for open borders per se. The government should not be involved in where you travel to, and they are for the legalization of all drugs. That would be a very honest libertarian, a true principled one that you can even argue that is pro-choice, one that the government should not have right to infringe on somebody infringing on your own bodily functions. So I think this one, when a lot of people say they're libertarian in America, they are not. They're just conservative, and they don't actually know anything about actual libertarian. It just sounds cool. I don't know.
Yeah, because saying you're a conservative just makes you sound like you're a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Gotta reject that.
And also want to point out, libertarianism is also, as a term, is known around the world mostly as a very left thing. Like, it means in a lot of other countries just like anarchism, pretty much, like leftist social libertarianism. But in America, really, is the only place where it's a very right ideology and very pro-capitalist sort of sense to the word.
Yeah, and it's ironic because the way American libertarianism started is rooted in extreme fucking racism and hatred of Jews.
Fascism is strongly individualist, strongly pro-market, strongly totalitarian and strongly pro-state, and strongly pro-property. Distinctive features of fascism include a strict regressive moralism, populist politics, dictatorial legislation, militarism, systemic state violence, right-wing values such as nationalism, traditionalism, xenophobia, and racism, and an almost inevitable movement towards an ethno-state. Somewhat counterintuitively, fascism is not incompatible with social welfare, and regimes such as Mussolini's fascist Italy used welfare both to build grassroots support among the population and as a means of social control. However, fascist governments typically outlaw labour unions, forcing workers to join labour organisations under direct government control, preventing the workers from exercising labour autonomy and placing all their rights at the mercy of the state. That concludes this brief overview of typical anarchist systems. Future videos will provide detailed...
Okay, so fascism, what would you give that on the scale?
Great. The best one we've seen. Totally good. No, the worst one. Probably the worst. Really bad.
I like that one.
You just like the logo.
Shit we got if we did that. We got property. We got fucking
welfare.
Racism and xenophobia.
Whoa.
But welfare.
We can keep welfare. That's cool,
dude. And
yeah,
populism. That's just inherently good, right?
Yeah, of course. No need to look further. No, fascism, pretty terrible. Not based at all.
Hey, if you enjoyed that, then make sure to subscribe, like the video, share it, ring the bell, whatever the hell, and get ready for the next Antisocial Acolyte stream this Wednesday coming up. We stream on Wednesdays. That's a thing we do. So, yeah, make sure to subscribe for that.